Well, hello, everyone. It's John Laughland here. I'm the director of FVD International, Forum for Democracy International. I'm delighted to welcome you to this, the first video edition of the forum. We've been running the forum now as an X space for more than a year, and now we're going over to a video format, which I'm delighted about, and for which I am in particular grateful to our friends, our co-hosts, Peter Lavelle and Jeremy Nell, who I believe are joining us. Thank you both very much indeed for your input. And to celebrate this new beginning for us, we are delighted to be addressing a very topical issue. Sometimes our previous forums have been on issues that are not necessarily in the news, but as it happens, the issue of free speech is very much in the news. I'm delighted to say that we are welcoming as our main guest for today, Maike Gosch, who joins us from Hamburg. Maike, thank you so much for joining us. We're very pleased to see you. I hope you can hear us. I can't hear you right now. Okay, well, perhaps you can unmute your mic, because we can't hear you right now. At least I can't hear you. The issue of free speech, Maike Gosch came to my attention with a brilliant article that she wrote on Thomas Fazi's Substack about Compact magazine and the closure on the orders of the German government of that important German publication. Compact magazine is a physical magazine. You can buy it in kiosks. The circulation is about 40,000 copies a month. But of course, like many media outlets, they have a very significant internet presence. They have, I believe, something like a million viewers for their regular broadcasts on YouTube. And as it happens, I've known the editor of Compact magazine, Jürgen Elsässer, for many years, for at least 20 years. I first came into contact with him at the time of the Kosovo War in 1999, or shortly thereafter. And in a job I used to do, we often did events together with Compact magazine. We organized conferences together in Berlin and in Leipzig on at least three occasions. And so naturally, I followed the brutal closure of the magazine. The pictures we saw a moment ago of police turning up at Jürgen Elsässer's home. A very large number of police turned up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And Maike Gosch gave a very interesting account, not only of the events when the magazine was closed, but also of the legal background. And so, Maike, perhaps we could start, perhaps you could explain to us, and I've just seen a video about this with Jürgen Elsässer and his wife. Perhaps you could tell us what happened that morning. What happened when the magazine was closed?
I think her mic is off, John.
Yes, Maike, we can't hear you. Your microphone is off. I don't have it. It's in the shell. It's on the side. Having much luck with Maike.
I think her microphone is on, but now her screen has gone blank.
Yep. I don't have it. Just a second.
Am I back? Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yes, absolutely. So I'm not sure whether you heard my question. I was asking you to set the scene for what happened though a couple of weeks ago when the police turned up at Jürgen Elsässer's house in very large numbers. They went through his house. They got him out of bed. Apparently, they even accompanied his wife to the toilet. She described this as a very humiliating moment. Perhaps you could tell us what happened. Go ahead.
You?
So we've
No.
obviously got technical difficulties. I'm sure they'll be sorted out in a few minutes.
It's the inaugural. It's always the inaugural. It's the inaugural Laughland, John.
Exactly. Yeah.
In the meantime, while we're waiting for her, John, give me some background to the magazine itself in terms of its history.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting history, and I'm glad you asked that question. Jürgen Elsässer, who I guess is in his 60s now, was a leftist. He was close to the Green Party of Joschka Fischer back in the days when the Green Party used to be pacifist and anti-war and so on. You may remember that in the 1980s there was a huge peace movement in Germany, protesting against the deployment of missiles that were directed against the Eastern Bloc, including East Germany. And he drifted, I think, from about the time of the Kosovo War onwards, to what is often described more and more as a right-wing nationalist position. Although, of course, there is consistency, because both when he was a green lefty pacifist, and then also later when he became identified with the extreme right, he of course was campaigning essentially against American domination and in favor of German sovereignty and national sovereignty of Europe in general. But it's true that he has taken up, it's a really good magazine. I mean, when you open it, unlike many magazines, you actually want to read it. It has good images. It has often quite provocative articles. It talks about many things other than politics. It talks about culture, history. But yes, it does, of course, talk about the sensitive issues like migration and so on. And above all, I would say Elsässer is a very acute observer of German politics and international politics. He's very good on television. He does a regular YouTube broadcast. It's in German, of course, with his colleagues, and it's always very interesting. In other words, there's a very high quality. He's not just a political hack. And of course, although of course he's close to the AfD, the Alternative für Deutschland, he's not in any way organically linked to them. He's simply friendly with them. So, yeah. So, Maike, can we now hear you?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. We can hear you, but unfortunately we can't see you, which is a great shame. But
yeah, I'm sorry. Back to the podcast format.
yeah, we'll have to go back to indeed to audio. Tell us, Maike, you followed this very closely. Can we set the scene? And this, of course, is in the context of the overall problem of free speech, which, as I will say in a minute, is very, very topical across the whole of Europe. But can we start with the events? I've forgotten what the date was. It was a few weeks ago now. The actual date when the police turned up at Jürgen Elsässer's house. Could you describe for our viewers and our listeners what happened? And then we'll go into the legal issues in a minute.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it was a very showy event, and that's very typical of Nancy Faeser's, our Interior Minister's, sort of MO that she's been showing. So it was quite theatrical. At 6 o'clock or maybe earlier in the morning, Mr. Elsässer was awoken by, I think, about 40 like black-clad, sort of masked, really heavily sort of armed and protected policemen. So that the impression was sort of an anti-terrorism raid, and then was awoken and had opened the door with disheveled hair in his bathrobe, and then his whole private rooms were searched, and everything was turned upside down, and everything was taken. His laptop, I think, even like his chairs and his tables, all his diaries, basically everything. The same happened to his wife, who was, I think, in their holiday apartment, as well as to their office buildings, as well as, I think, one or two other apartments of people he worked with. And so it was a very very big dramatic raid, and also there was a photographer there, and there were a lot of like really broad sort of across the spectrum in German journalism articles coming out with the photos with Jürgen Elsässer sort of accosted at his door, and the sort of threatening images all across our media, and sort of quite long articles written on, of course, very negatively on Jürgen Elsässer in his publications. So that obviously was prepared, and obviously they were tipped off.
That's an extremely interesting point, which indeed you made, Maike, in your article, that the journalist, the press, was on hand. I mean, this is incredible. This is a police raid, as you also explain in your article, on the orders of the government. It's not on the orders of a court. There hasn't been any criminal procedure or indeed any judicial procedure at all. And instead it's a merely executive decision. And I believe the Interior Minister, Maike, boasted that she had closed it down because it was an extreme right-wing magazine. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, that was she's, okay, I don't want to say, but I don't think she's that intelligent, because the whole story, and we'll get into that in a minute probably, was that she said, I didn't ban a magazine, I banned the sort of association. So it was the association law. That's why the freedom of press and freedom of expression sort of barrier doesn't apply as strongly. But then in her sort of press statement, in her statement on X, an official statement on the Interior Ministry side, she said, today I banned the Compact magazine. So already misstepped there a little bit.
Yeah, and she, in other words, she was claiming this as a political act.
Yeah, absolutely, you're right. Yes, she was. And very proud, sort of showing like we're doing something against the right. And so I think it has sort of several aspects to it, and one is the legal aspect and the economic aspect, but there's a big part of a bigger PR aspect to it as well. It was meant to intimidate the whole scene.
Yeah, exactly. So that of course explains the presence of the journalists waiting outside his door. Let's go through the legal aspects, because I think that's where your article was concentrated on, Maike. You have just mentioned one of the legal aspects, which I've heard Jürgen Elsässer refer to, but I think you've developed other ones, perhaps more profound legal aspects in your article. The first point is that she has used the law on associations, in German Vereine. She's used the law on associations to close down a media company. Compact Magazine is a company. These are media companies. They have, as I said in my introduction, they sell newspapers, they sell magazines, they have an internet presence. And yet, how has she been able to use the law on associations to close down a company, and above all a media company, which obviously is protected by German free speech law, including constitutional law? How is that possible?
Yeah, so basically it is possible. When I first heard it, I thought that was just crazy, but it is actually possible, and it's also been done before. But of course, that's not what the law of association is for. So basically, why we have this possibility in Germany that you can ban criminal organizations or organizations that are radical or terrorist or threaten sort of our constitutional order, is, as so many things in our legal system, and something that we installed, or that was installed due to sort of our history and the fears. And but that's not what it's for. So basically, we had that in the past. There were some cases where that was used, but in none of these cases was the magazine the main thing. So it was organizations that were banned, and then sort of magazines or publications or newsletters that were attached to them.
Maike, how is this possible in a state of law? Because Compact Magazine, as I understand, is not a Verein. It is not an association. Associations are themselves legal entities. So how is it? I just don't get it.
Yeah, I know, and I share your reaction, but that's actually possible, sort of in a way, because the term sort of association is interpreted broadly in the law. So it covers any commercial or non-commercial entity. So it covers any group of people that somehow are linked together by a common cause and have some sort of structure. So it does actually cover a limited company. I didn't know that before either, but it does. So formally that works.
Yeah,
but there are a lot of other problems to that. The main problem is that it wasn't meant to forbid publications. There's a very special sort of legal structure that concerns the media and sort of media law and restrictions to media. And this is bypassed by taking sort of another law and saying, oh, it's also an association. So you can do it, but it's very wobbly, and I don't think it works. Like from the whole way our legal system is structured, it just goes against the grain of the whole sort of system.
Let's talk about the appeal because of course, Elsässer and Compact Magazine have appealed against this. But before we go into the next stage of legal issues, which you dealt with in your article, it's worth putting on record for for our listeners and our viewers, that of course, Compact Magazine has never been convicted of any kind of hate speech or libel or incitement or any other criminal act associated with speech acts or publications. And of course, there are plenty of laws in Germany in place which restrict incitement or libel or whatever, and probably also laws against hate speech. But Compact Magazine has never, as I understand, been convicted and I think never even accused of such acts. Is that correct?
That's correct, as far as I could research it. And so that's the second thing that's being bypassed. So the whole sort of structure of our media and press legal system or legal sort of structure is bypassed, and also criminal law is bypassed. And that's why they took the association law, because the boundaries are lower there, and because they couldn't get him via criminal law. And that also shows you how strange it is, how wobbly they make the system, and how much they widen sort of the application.
I can see Peter laughing and enjoying this. Peter, jump in if you want.
Well, I apologize for being late. I'm not the most technically adept person, but I did figure it out. I'm here. I'd like to ask our guests, I mean, is this kind of a parallel to this kind of fantasy lawmaking, the lawfare against Donald Trump? Because listening to what you're saying, I'm not a legal person, but just like the cases against Donald Trump, you can explain them to me over and over again. I still don't understand what the problem is here. And it sounds like the same thing in the case that we're discussing right now. It also sounds like, I don't know if Germany or the EU has RICO laws, but that sounds like RICO to me. Okay, you get one person, and then you get another layer, and you get that person, and it's all on a bulletin board, and it's a pyramid, and that's how you go after people. So many things have popped in my mind listening to you. Maybe we can address, maybe not at this moment, but before we finish, I mean, isn't there any kind of reflection on historical memory in Germany on these things? I mean,
well. Maike's article was indeed entitled "The Ghost of Germany's Past." So yes, there is a lot of reflection. But I mean, it's not only Germany. I mean, there are many other countries, unfortunately, which have also, the Soviet Union famously, the whole Eastern Bloc, which used police harassment against dissidents. That's well known. Maike, do you want to take us through some of the other legal issues?
Yeah, maybe also answer to the German sort of particularity, why I called it the ghosts in plural of Germany's past, because they basically active on both sides. So on the one side, it reminds us of sort of the beginning of repression, of course, a lot less brutally than used to be in our past, but sort of the feeling is very repressive, and But on the other hand, and I think that's something that I try to outline in my article, the fear on the side of the authorities and on the side of the government is also, in my view, a very, very important aspect. So they are acting out of fear. They're really, really afraid. I think they are genuinely afraid.
Can you just flip it to the other side? Is it, John has already mentioned Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. I mean, people erred wrongly on this. Well, if the authorities say it, it must be true. I mean, so many people don't understand that. I lived in communist Poland for many, many years. And there were a lot of people just kind of default, well, I mean, if he is accused, I mean, why would they accuse him if he wasn't guilty of it? I mean, a lot of people think that way, but people do it that way because they're afraid. They're afraid to speak up, even if they find it's whimsical or strange, but, oh, they must have something. I mean, it seems to me that the German body politic is erring on the wrong side of this.
Of course they are. What I'm trying to say is that it's a spiral, like an escalatory spiral. So both sides feel threatened. Of course, the sort of dissident and at the moment right wing, but also left wing, if we look at the Gaza Palestinian question, and a lot of other questions, the peace initiatives, etc., they feel very repressed and they are very scared of the state because it's becoming more and more repressive. But the state is also feeling really, really afraid and under siege. And I find that very interesting, that both sides are acting out of fear, and that I think you can only understand the development of German politics and sort of the way they are acting, and they are becoming more and more strange, is because Germans usually very law abiding, and they wouldn't usually sort of treat our fundamental law like that. That's in a way unprecedented. That hasn't happened for a very long time. So they actually feel themselves in a sort of 1932 situation, and they generally think sort of Nazi rule is coming back, and we will have stormtroopers in the streets, and they will kill everyone they don't like. And that's how they view Jürgen Elsässer, and that's how they view the AfD. A lot of them. And
Maike, you said earlier that the state fears. It has a sense of fear. What exactly does the state fear?
They fear that the AfD will come to power, and that it will basically be a reenactment of the 1930s in Germany. I'm not saying that that's true or that that's realistic at all, but I think that's a sort of narrative, and I work a lot in political strategy and narratives. That's a sort of narrative layer that they overlay over the situation and distorts the situation. And it's like if you are traumatized, for example, and then you stay in a relationship and someone says something hurtful and you overreact. That kind of that's the kind of thing. They overlay the old story over our current situation, which is very, very different. It's a very different world, very different political landscape. And that's why they act afraid. I think it's a sort of re-traumatization.
Yeah, but Maike, but you can make the argument that if things continue the way they are, then you have 1932 Germany, because you have this liberal fascism. I mean, it's almost like a quandary that either you sit back and do nothing and you get 1932, and if you charge ahead, you'll get 1932. I mean, this seems like a trap.
Exactly, and that's the sort of the comedy tragedy of it, is that by trying to avoid it, they are actually sort of speeding it up. And that's how I see the situation in Germany right now. And I tried to propose something at the end of my article, and is that we really all need to calm down, because it's also a lot of an escalation of emotions, an escalation of stress, an escalation of rhetorics. So from all sides, I also would always try to be respectful towards the government and be polite, and also try to understand their motives, because the more you get angry and the more you get scared, the less empathy you have, and the less you can even understand that maybe the other side isn't necessarily really nefarious.
Are there any individuals or institutions which can say, hey, let's slow down, everybody. We don't all have to agree on everything. But is anybody saying, can't you see where we're going, and say we need to sit down? we're not going to solve all problems, but we mutually see one ahead of us. I mean, is there any institutions, groups of people? I mean, I've spent enough time in Germany, and people are very law-abiding. I always kind of like that. Okay, really, I do. And because I'm a law-abiding guy. But this seems almost to the point of something I can't comprehend. This is something about German politics that I've studied since the Second World War, is that this seems incomprehensible to me.
Yeah, I share your feeling. I mean, I'm German. I studied law in Germany. I was actually a lawyer for a while. I worked in political communication for the last 13 years. And I was very close, actually, to the Green Party, also to the SPD. So I know the people very well, and I know their thinking. I also worked as a public servant in sort of ministries. I know exactly the kind of people that are there and their kind of thinking. But I'm as astonished as you are the way it's been going. And to your question, no, there is not. There is, and I think we hadn't really needed it before, and now we see the lack of something like the Free Speech Union, or like we have no organization that actually takes care of free speech, and that would chime in. But maybe to some good things happen, that at least in quite conservative newspapers and magazines, there was quite a bit of pushback. So there were people also from mainstream media who said, okay, now this is going too far. So now we're leaving an area. And I think I was very glad of that not only the alternative media sort of spoke up, or not only the quite right-wing media, but also the conservative media said, okay, that's not okay.
Well, that's encouraging. Sorry, go ahead, Jeremy.
Okay, so I was just going to say, you've written, Maike, about something called I think you called it the primacy effect. Would you say that this is linked to that?
Not necessarily. No, I actually, sorry. It a little bit in the way that it just brands Elsässer as a terrorist. So a little bit, you could say that. But the primacy effect is more after sort of a terror attack or like a big catastrophe where everyone is really shocked. So like October 7th or 9/11 or Bucha, like these kinds of things with the atrocity stories and everyone being in a state of shock, and then sort of grabbing to the first story that pops up and holding on to that. So that's more of a sort of shock doctrine, atrocity propaganda sort of thing. And Elsässer was well known in Germany before, and there was a lot of debate around it. And yeah, maybe I can take you through a little bit what happened after that, or sort of the next developments, because we actually had today a breaking news 2 hours ago in the case. And I don't know, John, because I missed the intro, if you've mentioned it.
I don't know about anything from today.
Okay, cool.
No, go ahead.
That I can break the news. So what they did is they forbid the magazine, they forbid the company behind it. They took all the money, they completely confiscated all the money, they closed all the accounts. They took, as I said, all the chairs, all the tables, probably the coffee pot. So basically everything that was there. And then, of course, Compact went to court against it. And usually this kind of thing, exactly, that's what happened today. This kind of court proceeding.
What we can see here is a tweet from Jürgen saying that the court has annulled the procedure. So there's a victory for Compact. Is that right?
Nearly, yes. What they basically do is it usually has to be decided by a court whether that association ban is valid, but this usually takes like 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And what, of course, the Interior Ministry did was said, okay, this is immediately applicable. So until the main case is decided, it remains banned. And against that, why
does Jürgen talk about victory, Sieg?
Okay, sorry, yeah, that was just the preparation. So, and then they could also launch a legal complaint against that, against the immediate result of the action, and he won that. So basically, the court has not decided on the main issue, but just decided in a sort of speedy decision that until the main case is decided, so in 3 to 4 years, everything remains as is, and and the ban it cannot be implemented yet. So basically, he will get everything back, and he will be able to publish. It's
Mike,
not been decided finally.
Is this like a test case? Is this is this a shot across the bow for other people? Because this case makes no sense to me at all. Stealing their chairs? I mean, come on. But is this a message to others? I mean, is this low-lying fruit that's easy to grab?
Both. It's a message, but it's also a sort of, you can imagine them sitting down and been doing that for like a year or two, seeing the AfD rise and seeing the right wing and the dissidents rise ever since the COVID protests, and gaining more and more tractions, and also starting already in the immigration crisis 2015. So basically they're strategizing, and they are thinking about, basically it's like a war strategy. So they have this whole map of who are the important people, who are the influencers, and who organizes like roadshows, who has the most viewers. And Compact was one very important linchpin in that structure. So it has a communication effect, but it also has a structure. It was supposed to have a structural effect to take out the enemy. And but as we saw today, that didn't go through. And I'm very, very glad that our federal administrative court, very high court, has said in its decision that very careful wording. They did not say you can't use the association ban to ban a magazine, which I'm a bit disappointed by, but I think they probably tried to compromise. They didn't want to go against the government too much. But what they said is it's not proportionate. So they said basically, if there are articles that go against our sort of fundamental laws, or if there are articles that contain hate speech, you can forbid them, but you can't sort of tear down the whole structure. That's not a proportionate measure, and that's a sort of a prerequisite of any kind of ban.
But if I understand it correctly, Maike, the original closure has now been suspended. So Compact Magazine is now back up and running as of 2 hours ago. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes. Sorry, couldn't think of the word suspended. It's suspended. So until the final decision of the court, it's suspended. So it's up and running, and everything is good.
Okay. For once, we're the bringers of good news. Then that's that's an unusual but very pleasant start to our new format.
Maike, you said you used the word enemies. Is that the level of political discourse? People have enemies? I thought we had adversaries. We had people we disagreed with. I mean, is this your word, or is this a word that's being bandied about? I mean, there are enemies of the state, enemies of society, enemies of liberalism.
No, absolutely. That's the word that's bandied about, and that's one of the milder words. So enemies of the Constitution is the term, and I think actually used by the politicians. Yeah, enemies of the Constitution. And I mean, that just shows you a little bit also the sort of strained atmosphere in Germany, where it's always a bit closer to the surface than maybe in other countries. The authoritarian and also fearful response to.
Well, what you're describing to us is the post-war political consensus of Germany is collapsing.
Yeah, I think collapsing is maybe too strong a word, but it's being worn thin. But there is pushback, and I think this decision by the court is very, very welcome development. And I actually breathe a lot, a sigh of relief, because I was really worried about Germany.
Don't think, Peter, that it's by any means specific to Germany. I mean, you mentioned, Peter, a minute ago, you mentioned Trump. And Maike then, in response to, I think, one of your questions, said that the adversaries or enemies of Compact Magazine think they're in 1932. But that's exactly what the Democrats keep saying in the United States. If Trump is elected, democracy will end. He will abolish elections. There won't be any more elections, and so on. And I want to I emphasize that because that's why I said it in the very beginning of my introduction, that this is a much bigger issue, of course, than just Compact Magazine, because we've had we're having a sort of concerted attack on freedom of speech. We've seen the run-in between Thierry Breton, the European Single Market Commissioner, who has threatened Elon Musk. He's threatened X with fines. He's repeatedly done this. He did this in an absolutely incredible way 2 days ago when he threatened Musk in a personal letter that he published on X, threatening him about the then upcoming interview with Trump. I mean, it's an absolutely blatant interference in this case in American politics. But I think it shows that European governments and indeed the American government are in panic mode. You know, you talked about fear recently. I think they do think that they're losing control of the narrative. And that's why they are deploying this lawfare all over the place. I mean, it's Thierry Breton against X. We had the right-wing Austrian activist Martin Sellner, who was thrown out of giving a lecture in Germany a few weeks ago. We've had people sent to prison in Britain for tweets which nobody read. There's a sort of general panic, I find, across the Western world. And I listened with great interest to what Maike was saying about when she spoke of her sorrow just now. And you'll come back in a minute about this, Maike. You say you watch this happening with great sorrow, but it's not just happening in Germany. And I want to mention, actually, if you don't mind, an experience I had with Jürgen Elsässer a little under 10 years ago. I think it was probably in 2016 or something like that, when we organized a big conference in Berlin, very big conference in a big hotel in Berlin opposite the Ministry of Defense, very swanky venue. And the theme of that conference was Frieden mit Russland, peace with Russia. And so that was the big theme. And I mentioned this issue because I think it's not neutral, the fact that he was one of the big and remains one of the big campaigners on the Russia question. And at that conference, we had various speakers. We were co-organizers of it, and we brought a French member of parliament. We brought a Russian businessman. But the story I want to tell, and I'm telling this to our co-hosts and our viewers, is that rather unexpectedly, an old man turned up at that conference, and he was given the floor. His name won't mean much to most people. It was Egon Bahr, who was then over 90 years old. He died a couple of years later.
Yeah.
Egon Bahr was he's not particularly well known outside Germany, but he's widely credited with being the architect of Ostpolitik, of Willy Brandt's opening towards communist Russia, and of course towards East Germany, at a time when the Cold War was at its height, and where the ideological conflict, East-West conflict, was at its height. And the fact that Egon Bahr turned up, Egon Bahr, who of course comes from the Social Democratic Party, he is absolutely not some kind of right-wing nutter. The fact that he came and attended our conference was of course an immense honor, both to us as co-organizers, but above all to Jürgen Elsässer. But it showed the absolute moderateness, the moderation of the message. This wasn't some meeting of crazy conspiracy theorists. It was, on the contrary, as I say, a meeting of minds across the political spectrum. Anyway, I wanted to put that out there because it's not very well known that he came to that event, and yet he did. And of course, by his presence, in a sense, gave it his approval. Go ahead, Maike.
Yeah, so that was, I found that really interesting, the Breton versus Musk sort of thing, because it's actually really interesting. It's framed by many and also by Americans as a sort of European meddling in American elections, and actually it's I think it's sort of, if you zoom out a little bit, it's bigger than that, because basically sort of starting around 2014, maybe 2017, there was a big push by transatlantic elites and sort of American State Department people, Homeland Security people, think tankers, who basically did a roadshow in Germany and also in Europe, pressuring Europe to fight disinformation and to take more measures for fighting disinformation, mainly against Russian disinformation. So all in the wake of the Ukraine conflict and the Crimea annexation, and also, of course, the whole Trump-Russiagate story. And so basically, the Digital Services Act on the EU level is actually, I think, pushed by transatlantic elites. So in a way, and Mike Benz described it as a boomerang, it is not sort of Europeans attacking an American or Americans or influencing the election. So it's Americans influencing the American election. You could say that. So if you look at the sort of sources and the background of how the Digital Services Act came to be, and sort of the laws before that, and the whole initiative is that, of course, there's a lot, as in all these big EU laws, there's a lot of good things that are regulated there. So against fraud, against phishing, against a lot of sort of problems in online media and online commerce. But hidden in that act are these little sort of open doors for manipulation and censorship, with words like harmful content, disinformation, with these legally very ambivalent and very vague terms. And that is basically the doors that they open in these huge laws that have an incredible scope and influence. That then what is harmful content and what is disinformation? Okay, so this will be decided by independent, and I can't make the quote sign now because you can't see me, but independent fact checkers. And the independent fact checking organizations and NGOs that they are partnering with, for example, like NewsGuard, have people from the CIA, from the NSA, from NATO, from the State Department in their board, and have a lot of people from media, but also a lot of former sort of intelligence people in them. So basically, it's censorship by proxy.
Yeah,
and
a very important point. Well, as far as the Digital Services Act is concerned, the censorship part of it is not some detail. I think it's the whole purpose of the Digital Services Act.
Absolutely, I'm just saying it's hidden sort of a little bit.
Yeah, well,
it is absolutely the whole point. I agree.
Thierry Breton has been making these threats for some time. He made them again 2 days ago, but he he made them when the act was being prepared, and he made them then, I think, when it was finally promulgated. And I think it is, therefore, as I say, part of an attempt across the board to control discourse. There are lots of people who perhaps we should try and get them on. There's Mike Benz in the United States. There's Matt Taibbi. We've had actually, his name is going to slip my mind right now at the key moment, but we've had Philip something. Anyway, he works with Matt Taibbi. We've had an X-Space, the forum on this issue. So there are lots of people who work on this, and there's no doubt that there is a big penetration. This isn't a conspiracy. There is an interpenetration, let's say, between the social networks and the security services. There was a famous case. I think he's now left his previous job, but the editor of Facebook for the Middle East worked for a PSYOPs unit in the British Army called Brigade 77, and he even put it on his LinkedIn page. He was proud of his dual affiliation. I have to say that today, so 2 pieces of breaking news in one forum, but perhaps our viewers already know this. The European Commission president seems to have disavowed Thierry Breton, and that she didn't approve the letter and all the rest of it. So maybe it's, the power of big companies. After all, X is a gigantic company, and Musk is the richest man in the world. So maybe simply the power of X has triumphed. But there's no doubt that these tendencies are underway, and they are extremely worrying. You mentioned the Free Speech Union, Maike. You said there isn't such a thing in Germany. You're talking about Toby Young's Free Speech Union in Britain, is that right?
Yes. And I just sort of recently came into contact with a bigger network of people fighting for these issues internationally. And realized talking to them that that's not a thing in Germany. That we don't have that, and we desperately need it. So I don't have the resources or the time right now. But if anyone listening wants to instigate an organization like that in Germany, I think now would be a good time.
Well, Toby Young's organization is very impressive because they defend not only professional free speakers, i.e. journalists and other media personalities, but also private individuals. There are many sad cases of people in Britain losing their jobs, for example, because they've expressed some politically incorrect view, you know, on a Facebook post or something. And the Free Speech Union sticks up for them as well. And it also works as a I mean, I don't want to say a commercial operation, but there is a commercial side to it. So you can become a member, and then you pay a subscription, and then if you are the victim of an anti-free speech measure, then you can call upon the association to protect you and so on. Anyway, I can't make publicity.
It's really interesting. Is that it just seems like we go from one generated crisis to the next. Okay, we have Russiagate. Okay, we have meddling in American elections, European elections, and we have COVID, and then we have the Ukraine issue, and most immediately we have Gaza, and all of them have one thing in common: suppression of freedom of speech, and suppression to some degree of assembly, and the criminalization of civil society is what we're getting. Okay. And from where my standpoint is here, is that all I see is that the West mobilizing, conscription, increasing the military industrial base and all of this. It's all about mobilization, and that's always a good excuse for, we're in a crisis right now. We have to, we're not going to suspend our liberties, but, we have to be careful. And then these people are going to monitor it. I mean, this is like this kind of crisis mentality that is nonstop.
But if you don't mind, can I jump in here quickly? Maike, and I suppose Peter and John, actually, this is more of a meta question, but we often talk about these things within the context of the illegitimate or legitimate authority clamping down on free speech. But when we talk about the people have the power, then what do we actually mean? I mean, shouldn't people simply say no and continue doing what they're doing? What ultimately will happen if people just say no and continue with the magazine, for example, or continue it in some decentralized fashion and just absolutely reject
Jeremy, sorry to interrupt.
The top-down imposition.
Steve Bannon is still in jail.
Yeah, exactly. They have coercive measures at their disposal. The bank accounts of Compact Magazine were frozen until 2 hours ago.
But let me sorry. Oh yeah, but I like your question, because we also have to think about. I think we are in the middle of a big transformation, and I think a lot of potential is awakened. And I can speak for Germany. My first reaction when you asked that question was, no, that's just not in our natural character. Like we will obey the law, we will obey authority. That's just very, very much part of Germans. But I think there's a chance at the moment of a transformation there as well, and of a restoration of the German democratic spirit, because so many people are sort of networking, are talking about it, are discussing it, are speaking up. So I actually feel since the end of the Second World War, we've been a bit of a sort of a bit patronized democracy, and I think it's also a very good crisis for us to rediscover that the power actually lies with us. And it will take a while because it goes a lot against the grain. But actually that happened after they banned Compact. The Elsasser and some other people, they got together and they just founded a new magazine and took all the articles that were planned for the first one and called the magazine Nancy, like our interior minister, and made like really jokes about it, and then presented the new magazine. and there was actually talk of a criminal proceeding against it, because that's of course also not allowed. But now with the decision of the court, I think they should be fine. So actually they are trying to do that, and things like that are happening. There's a lot of civil disobedience. There's a lot of musicians, they write songs about it and they make jokes about it, and there's satire about it. So so that is happening. It's a slow process,
Maike,
and it's fraught.
I think it's very important. I'm glad you bring up the history of it, because Germany's legacy since the Second World War is a testament of being cognizant and aware of how systems can fail and how people can fall under sway of truly hideous ideas. And I really have a lot of hope that Germans will turn around and say, we've done this before, we're not going to do it again, and we will continue to be the beacon of a powerful civil society holding power in check. Okay, because if it doesn't, if not keeping power in check happens in Germany again, then that the foreboding is something I don't even want to think about.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the lesson for Germany, is to learn is that you can't react to what you perceive as a sort of right-wing fascist threat with fascism. And I think for the rest of maybe the more Anglo-American or Western sphere, to recognize is that they are not the good guys. And because for Germany, we know we were the bad guys, and our democracy was fragile a little bit, and we were prone to being undemocratic. And I think for Great Britain and America, that awareness has not been there as much. And I think that's very helpful for them also to realize.
Speaking of magazines, Maike, I'm thinking of your neighbor and their magazine, Charlie Hebdo. I mean, is there perhaps a lesson that can be learned here, or is that just not relevant?
My neighbor? Do you mean France or?
Yes.
Sorry, yeah.
That neighbor.
That neighbor. The Olympic neighbor. So I think one interesting lesson is that how different and I still call it my bubble, even though I've left it quite a bit, my left liberal green NGO bubble reacted back then when the Charlie Hebdo thing happened, and how everyone had the hashtag and had it on their profile, and there was so much solidarity, even though I think even their content was really harmful. I was really hateful, but there was such a big wave of solidarity, and none of that, like zero people of my acquaintance of the sort of liberal left said that they were that proclaimed any kind of solidarity. So it just shows how partisan it is, and how, in a way, hypocritical.
You know, Maike, you twice mentioned in our conversation here about the lineage of your political awareness, and you said, back, you knew these Greens and back in the day. Well, I did too. And what the hell happened to them? I mean, that's it. I'm sorry. I'm not prone to hyperbole here. But, it seems now that the Greens in Germany are just a psyop from the CIA. I'm sorry. Everything, that's the only conclusion I can draw, because I knew these people in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, I have to be a bit careful what I say here.
Okay.
German laws. But because we have this new group of people, it's called delegitimizing of the state. But I agree that they have changed a lot, and I think that some of the personnel has also changed. So there's a personal change in personnel, and I think it's also a generation that grew up in, let's say, transatlantic think tanks and circles.
Well, that's an understatement.
And I think that shaped very much their political orientation. And I think we cannot underestimate, because a lot of it goes back to that, is the whole organization of the information space around the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So I think there was a lot of propaganda and sort of structures and narratives put in place there that a lot of people fell for, and that shapes a lot of their views and their decisions now.
Well, that's one of the things I referred to right at the beginning. In fact, just before you came on stream, Peter, Jürgen Elsässer himself had been with the Greens. He was a sort of anti-war lefty before becoming an extreme righty. But I think that the fact that indeed the Greens, particularly the German Greens, but also ultimately the British Labour Party, we haven't talked about Britain much. We've talked perhaps too much about Germany, because I repeat, I really don't think that these tendencies are in any way particular to Germany. On the contrary, we're seeing authoritarianism very strongly in Britain, in Australia, in Canada, in New Zealand, and so on, in all the supposed, and of course to some extent in the United States. What I think this shows, the fact that the German Greens and the British Labour Party are the main vectors now of American influence, is a reflection of the fact that over the decades of the Cold War, the American deep state spent most of its time trying to seduce the soft left, what then became the new left, the new anti-Soviet left. And this started actually in the 50s, or even probably in the 40s, when the CIA was set up. And by a process, I think may have said this before in other editions of the forum, but by a process of sort of osmosis, and also by the fact that the people originally recruited back in the very early days of the American deep state were essentially leftists. They were left liberals. Hemingway, Arthur Koestler, Erich Fromm, all these people, the Frankfurt School. These people were not on the right. They were not conservatives. They were, on the contrary, trying to win the Cold War from an essentially liberal or left liberal perspective. And the outcome of that now is that it's those left or center left, or whatever you want to call them, parties, which are even more vectors of American influence in Europe than the conservative parties, who traditionally, of course, had that role. Jeremy, do you want to make a last intervention?
No, I'm good, John.
Okay,
I've enjoyed the conversation immensely.
I don't know how John uses the word, but interventions like save the day. But
Maike,
John, go ahead.
Have some closing thoughts from you before we wrap up. Maike, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's really helpful to not see it as a left-right issue that much anymore, because these terms are so misleading, and we are in a very sort of very fluid and shifting political landscape, and I think we have to be on the side of sort of freedom of speech and freedom of expression and democracy, and the left-right cultural fight is a distraction.
Yeah.
And we have to remember as well, I would say, that free speech is not just a right. It's not just something that people should fight for, although of course they should do that, and it is a right. But above all, it is a social good. It's a social good. Truth is often difficult to get to. Sometimes the process of getting there is messy. There may indeed be a lot of what's now called disinformation in the process. But it's the encounter between, and I'm more or less quoting John Stuart Mill here, the encounter between information and disinformation, which strengthens the information and helps us all to get closer to the truth. So this isn't just a battle to be won. I mean, not just in the sense of we're on one side of the barricades and they're on the other, but it's something that we should all understand, I hope, as a social good. And that's what we hope the forum will make a small contribution to. So thank you very much, Maike. We're very grateful to you for your time. Peter, Germ, thank you for your time. And I'm very pleased with our first video format. And we look forward to repeating it at the same time next week. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.